He walked in with confidence, a Bible in his hand, conviction in his voice, and the thought that he was bringing truth to someone who was lost. In his mind, he believed he was doing something noble, helping a Muslim see the real light. For weeks he had been preparing for this moment. He had studied arguments, highlighted verses, watched countless debates. This wasn't just a conversation to him. It was a mission. He thought he would impress the Muslim, challenge him, and eventually convince him to consider Christianity. But little did he know, the most unexpected journey of his life was about to begin. A journey not of changing someone else's faith, but of rediscovering his own soul. As they sat down, he started speaking passionately, quoting, asking questions, even challenging the Muslim's beliefs. He expected resistance, anger, maybe even a heated debate. But what he received was something completely different: calmness, humility, and respect. The Muslim man didn't interrupt, he didn't mock. He didn't even try to win the argument. Instead, he listened with genuine interest and responded with soft, spoken clarity. He spoke about peace, purpose, and the idea of worshiping the Creator directly. No emotional manipulation, no shouting, just truth spoken with sincerity. And then came a moment that shook the Christian to his core. A simple question. If you truly seek God, the Muslim asked, would you be willing to ask Him to guide you, even if it leads you somewhere unexpected? That sentence echoed in his mind for days. He had always believed he was guided. But that question challenged something deep inside him. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't asked God to show him truth without conditions. For the first time, he stopped arguing and started reflecting. The following days were quiet on the outside, but stormy on the inside. He began to read about Islam, not to argue, but to understand. He listened to reverts who sounded just like him. People who once came to disprove, but ended up discovering something beautiful. The more he listened, the more he realized Islam wasn't what he had assumed. It wasn't strange, it wasn't foreign. It was pure, it was simple, it was direct. One God, no partners, no confusion. Just a direct connection between the Creator and the creation. The pride in his heart began to melt, replaced with questions, tears, and a hunger for truth. One night, sitting alone, he whispered something he never thought he would say. God, if this is truly from you, then guide me to it. That prayer changed everything. It opened a door in his heart that had been shut for years. And behind that door was not a religion of rituals, but a way of life, a light, a peace he had never known. The same man who came to convert someone else was now standing at the edge of transformation himself. The first time they met, he walked in with a confident smile, holding his Bible tightly under his arm. He believed he was ready for this moment, the moment he would finally plant a seed of doubt in the mind of a Muslim. To him, this wasn't just an ordinary conversation. It was a chance to open someone's eyes, to bring someone closer to what he believed was salvation. He had prepared arguments for weeks, collected verses he thought were convincing, and practiced how to respond to common objections. In his heart, he saw himself as a man on a mission of guidance. What he didn't expect was to be met not with resistance, but with an unexpected kind of humility. As he started talking, he took the lead. He quoted, explained, even challenged. He expected the Muslim man to defend himself with the same fire, perhaps with counter verses, loud rebuttals, or even frustration. But instead, he received a calm smile, a soft voice, and a respectful response. The Muslim didn't interrupt. He didn't mock. He didn't look threatened. He simply listened. And when it was his turn to speak, he didn't dive into religious texts. He just asked one simple question. Why do you believe what you believe? This question, although basic, felt heavier than any argument the Christian had brought. For a moment, he paused. He had been so focused on what to say next, he hadn't really thought about what drove his own faith. The Muslim continued, gently, as it tradition. Is it community? Or is it conviction based on clear truth? These weren't questions meant to win a debate. They were questions meant to reach the heart. The Christian shifted in his seat. His script was ready, But now, for the first time, it felt a little shaky. He responded, trying to gather his thoughts, but something about the tone of the conversation made him realize this wasn't going the way he had expected. The Muslim wasn't trying to convert him. He was trying to understand him. And that changed everything. What was supposed to be a one-sided attempt to preach turned into a two-way exchange. Not of doctrines, but of souls. And somewhere deep inside, the Christian felt a quiet discomfort, a nudge in his heart that whispered, "Maybe there's something more here than you thought." He left that first meeting with a storm of thoughts in his mind. He had come prepared to convince, but instead, he found himself disturbed, not by defeat, but by a strange sense of calm that lingered from the conversation. The Muslim man hadn't shouted, hadn't quoted endlessly, hadn't even tried to win. And that was the part that unsettled him most. It made him wonder why someone who disagreed with him could still carry such peace, such quiet conviction. That night, he lay in bed unable to sleep, replaying every word, every question, every moment. The simplicity of it all bothered him, yet attracted him. He went back to his usual routines, attending church, reading the Bible, watching Christian scholars. But now, there was a subtle restlessness. He found himself returning to that question again and again. Why do you believe what you believe? He tried brushing it off, telling himself that he knew the truth already, but that peaceful voice of the Muslim man kept echoing in the background of his thoughts. For the first time in years, he found himself not preaching to others, but reflecting inward. Out of curiosity, he began reading more about Islam, not to find faults, but to understand. He opened articles about Muslim converts, watched videos of people embracing Islam, and read personal stories of those who left Christianity behind. What struck him the most was that many of these stories were similar to his own. People who came with the intention to refute, but ended up discovering something different. Their honesty resonated with him, especially when they spoke of how Islam gave them clarity about God, purpose, and peace. The more he read, the more he realized that he had spent years defending his faith, but rarely questioning it. And now, without anyone forcing him, he was beginning to ask questions he had avoided for so long. What is the nature of God? Why do we need an intercessor? Does truth need complexity, or is it supposed to be simple? These weren't just theological debates anymore. They were personal reflections. And with each passing day, his heart grew a little softer and his certainty a little weaker. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, but something inside was shifting. He had set out to change someone else's belief, but it was his own foundation that was quietly being shaken. There came a moment when he could no longer ignore the pull in his heart. What started as a mission to convince someone else had now turned into a journey of deep personal reflection. The arguments he once stood so firmly upon began to feel incomplete. Not wrong necessarily, but lacking the clarity and directness that his soul was now craving. He began to compare, not out of disrespect, but out of genuine curiosity. On one side, he had what he had known all his life, layers of doctrine, complex interpretations, and concepts he had always accepted without much questioning. On the other side, he was discovering a way of life that centered on one message, the oneness of God and submission to Him alone. He started watching Islamic lectures and debates, not to challenge them, but to understand them. Every time he heard a Muslim say, "We worship the Creator, not the creation," something stirred in him. The idea that one could have a direct connection to God, without clergy, without intermediaries, felt incredibly pure. It was simple yet powerful. He remembered a time when he used to question Muslims about their beliefs, asking how they could follow a religion without a savior or a divine son. But now he found himself asking the opposite. Why did he need anyone between him and God? What affected him most, though, wasn't the theological answers, it was the lifestyle. He saw how Muslims prayed consistently, turned to God in every moment of life, and lived with purpose and humility. Their acts of worship weren't limited to Sundays or special holidays. They were part of everyday life, It was submission in its truest form, not just ritual but relationship. And that idea began to break down his old perceptions of what it meant to live a spiritual life. He felt a mix of emotions, guilt, confusion, hope. He had spent years trying to preach, assuming he had the full truth, but now he was the one being guided. Not by force, not by clever argument, but by something deeper. Truth had found its way into his heart not through debate, but through sincerity. He wasn't ready to make any big decisions yet, but in the quiet of his soul, a door had opened, and the light coming through was impossible to ignore. He began distancing himself from the role he had once embraced so passionately, the role of the one who corrects, teaches, and preaches. Instead, he now found himself in the role of a student, a seeker, someone who was no longer satisfied with just repeating what he had heard all his life. The confidence he once wore like armor had slowly given way to humility. He no longer saw the conversation with the Muslim as a debate, but as a gift. A moment that had quietly planted a seed inside him, a seed that was now growing with every question he asked himself in silence. He started engaging in deep reflection, revisiting the core messages he had once taken for granted. He questioned the concept of salvation he had once passionately preached. Why would a just and merciful Creator demand a blood sacrifice for forgiveness? Why couldn't God, in His infinite mercy, forgive directly? These questions began to echo louder than any sermon he had heard in his past, and as he compared both paths, he noticed something striking. Islam's message about God was direct, powerful, and consistent. God is one, all-powerful, all-merciful, needing no partners, no sons, and no intercessors. One night, he opened the Quran, not to criticize it or find flaws, but to genuinely understand what it was saying. As he read, he found verses that spoke directly to the heart. Words about patience, justice, mercy, truth, and the importance of thinking and reflecting. What shocked him most was that the Quran didn't present a new religion. It reminded people of the same message delivered by all the prophets: to worship the one true God alone and live righteously. There was a strange comfort in its clarity. The more he read, the more he felt like he was being reminded of something his soul already knew but had forgotten. He started to notice small changes in himself. He stopped arguing for the sake of argument. He started praying, not in the way he used to, but in a raw, personal way, just talking to God sincerely, without rituals or rehearsed words. And every time he did, he felt lighter. He still had questions, yes, but the more he searched, the more the answers pointed him in one direction. Islam was no longer a religion he was trying to refute. It was quickly becoming the truth he was afraid to accept, not because it lacked evidence, but because deep down, he knew it would change everything. He couldn't deny it anymore. His heart was moving faster than his mind could keep up. Everything he had built his beliefs on was being reshaped, not by force, but by truth entering quietly through the cracks. He began to recall his earlier conversations with Muslims, moments he used to consider victories when he had silenced their arguments. But now, as he looked back, he realized that those Muslims had something he didn't: consistency, clarity, and inner peace. They weren't defensive. They weren't lost in complex theology. They simply stood firm on a foundation that didn't waver. And the more he reflected, the more he realized how much he longed for that kind of unwavering conviction. At this point, his study of Islam was no longer casual. It became intentional. He started waking up early to listen to stories of others who had walked this same path, people who came to challenge Islam but ended up embracing it. The similarities in those journeys felt deeply personal, almost like a mirror being held up to his own soul. Every story reminded him, truth doesn't need loudness to be powerful. It simply needs sincerity and openness. He began to practice the Islamic way of cleanliness, of humility before prayer, even trying to mimic the movements of Salah. There was something so deeply grounding in the act of placing his forehead to the ground. It felt real, it felt raw, it felt like submission. Not to a man, not to an image, not to a symbol, just to God. The same God he had always believed in, but now approached without layers or intermediaries. That direct connection was something he never realized he had been missing. One day, he sat quietly in his room, reflecting on everything. He looked at all the books he had read, all the sermons he had preached, all the debates he had engaged in. And then, he looked at where his heart now stood. He felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the years he had spent fighting what he didn't understand, and relief that he had finally allowed himself to see clearly. He knew he was standing at the edge of a decision that would change his life forever. And yet, instead of fear, there was peace, a kind of peace he had never felt before. That final step wasn't taken in front of a crowd. There was no dramatic debate, no loud argument, no audience to witness what was happening. It happened in the stillness of his own heart, in a moment of truth between him and his Creator. After all the conversations, the reading, the inner conflict, and the countless moments of silent reflection, he finally reached a place of clarity. It wasn't that he suddenly had all the answers to every question. But what he did have was something far more powerful. The certainty that he had found the truth, and the courage to submit to it. He thought back to the first time he had spoken to that Muslim man, the one he had tried to convince, the one he believed needed saving. Now, the roles had completely reversed. It wasn't the Muslim who had needed saving, it was him. Not in the sense of being lost or evil, but in the sense that his soul had been searching for something real, something pure, and he hadn't even realized it. That Muslim didn't win an argument. He simply spoke the truth with calmness and sincerity, and that truth had done all the work. It had pierced through years of belief, emotion, and pride, and planted something far stronger: conviction. He whispered the Shahada with trembling lips, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. And in that moment, everything changed. It wasn't just words, it was a declaration that reshaped his identity, his purpose, and his future. All the fear of what others would think, all the pressure of what he might lose, faded into the background. What he gained was far greater: peace with his Creator, clarity of purpose, and a heart finally at rest. From that day forward, he walked a new path, one built not on pride, but on submission. Not on trying to convince others, but on seeking to live the truth he had discovered. He still remembered where he came from, and he held no anger toward his past, only gratitude because it had led him here, to Islam, to peace, to a life finally in harmony with the truth his heart had always longed for. And so, what began as a mission to change someone else's belief ended with a transformation of his own heart. He set out to guide others. But in the process, he found himself being guided, not by arguments or debates, but by the quiet, undeniable truth that spoke directly to his soul. His journey reminds us that sometimes the biggest changes happen when we're simply willing to listen, reflect, and open our hearts to the possibility that what we once rejected may actually be what we were always searching for. His story isn't just about changing religions. It's about the courage to let go of pride, the strength to question deeply held beliefs, and the beauty of discovering peace where he least expected it. It's a journey from resistance to realization, from debate to surrender, and from searching to finding. In the end, he didn't just accept Islam, he embraced a truth that had been calling him all along. Thank you so much for watching this video. If his story touched your heart, inspired your thoughts, or opened your eyes, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Your support helps spread these powerful journeys to others who might be walking a similar path. Subscribe for more real stories of transformation, discovery, and truth. Until next time, stay sincere, stay thoughtful, and never stop seeking.